In today's video, we're looking at how you can find the perfect title for your manga, comic, or light novel. One of the most important aspects to creating a good manga, comic, or light novel is having a really good title. In most cases, the title will be the first thing your audience will ever see or hear about your book, so it's really important that your title really introduces that world to that potential audience and makes them interested in the story that you're telling. Your title needs to be something that's really going to identify your book, and it needs to be something that really helps your book to stand out among other titles. So let's go further into the tips in today's video, and I'm going to talk about how you can find the right title for the story you're telling. This video is going to be divided into 3 stages in order to create a good title, and please keep in mind as I talk about these tips that you don't have to include every single tip in the title that you're creating. You can just choose the tips that apply to you in your story and choose the information that feels right for you to create the title that is right for your story. The first stage is brainstorming. In order to create a really good title, it's important to get all of the ideas out of your mind and onto paper in order to know exactly what ideas you have to work with. I highly recommend that once you have a good idea of your story, you should try summarizing your story in 1 sentence. That's the best way to get a good idea of what your story is like at its core and what kind of story you're creating. From there, it's also really important to know your target audience. Understand who you're creating your story for. Is it targeted towards children? Is it to adults? Is it to teenagers? Is it to people who like high intensity action stories? Or is it to people who are in the shoujo demographic who prefer romance stories or cute stories? So really understand what kind of story you really want to create, and that can help you to get a better idea of how to create a good title that is going to suit that audience. As you're brainstorming, also consider the main themes and the main genre in your story. Every story will have a select number of genres that's included in it. For example, if your story is in the horror genre, it would likely have a very different title than it would if your story is in the romance or comedy genre, for example. The main theme of your story is how that story might make people feel when they are reading it, or the message you want to get across to that audience. A theme might be that you might put a focus on how your character spends time with friends, or you might focus on how your character feels that their hobbies are really important to them and wants to follow their dreams. You need to consider why you are creating this book and what message you're really telling throughout your story. Understanding these things can help you to create a title that really reflects those aspects in that title. I also suggest you know the feeling behind the title. Think about all the feelings you commonly focus on within your story and consider how you can convey that feeling within the title you're creating. All of these points in this phase are to help you get a better idea of the story you're telling, so you can have a better idea of what kind of title would make people really want to read that story. It's important to have a good understanding of your story when you are creating the title, because you really need to know how you can get that information across in just a few words. And keep in mind that obviously you don't have to tell the entire story through the title, but your audience needs to get a pretty good idea of what your story is about just from those words alone. So now that you have a better idea of what kind of story you're creating and what kinds of title ideas you may want to work with, it's now time to move on to stage 2 of creating the perfect title. In this part, we're going to get a better understanding of your story at its core and how to translate that into creating a really good title. We're going to look at some things you should consider when you are creating a title in order to make it more appealing and stand out among other titles. First of all, I highly recommend that you try putting a hook in your title. A hook is something in writing where it leaves your audience with questions that can only be further answered through reading your book. Try putting a hook, something unexpected in your title that will make people want to read more to understand why that is included in the title. For example, a hook in a title, I'm just coming up with these off the top of my head, but for example, a title with a hook might be that you could have a title that is called The Last Game, something like that. And then the audience might wonder, well, why is it the last game? What is happening? Why is this the last time? It makes it sound very dire. Or in another example, if you were creating a shoujo story, for example, then the title may be something like The Year My Heart Broke. and then your audience might wonder, well, why is it the year that that character's heart broke? What happened? And so it does also create a hook. So that's what I really mean by creating a hook. It needs to be something unexpected. Now keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to have a hook in your title. And again, all of the tips in this video are something that you can consider for your title. They're not something that you absolutely have to do to have a good title. Next, I really recommend that you understand your story at its core, and by this I'm really talking about the main tone of your story. How do you think people will feel when reading your story? Is it the kind of story that makes people feel nostalgic or sad? Is it the kind of story that's very upbeat and makes people feel very happy and positive? Is it the kind of story that keeps readers on the edge of their seats like a horror story? Or is it more of a mystery where people reading it might be guessing and wondering what is going to happen? You need to understand where your story is at its core and then how you can reflect that in the title you're creating. If you're creating a mystery story, for example, you might make the title something more unexpected or surprising. For example, the title of a mystery story that might be more unexpected might be The 12 Chimes of Death or something like that, indicating like the 12 chimes on a clock or something, and then a murder mystery story. That's a very random example, but I hope you understand what I mean. Every time the genre or the tone of the story changes, it really changes the way the title may sound. Or if you were creating more of a comedy story, the title of your story would also be very light-hearted and comical. You might even have a bit of a joke in the title. For example, the title of the book might be something like The Day I Stubbed My Toe or something like that. And it's just a very random and comical title, but it really reflects the tone of the story. I also suggest that you keep it easy to remember, and this doesn't necessarily mean that the title needs to be something short or simple. I generally think when it comes to titles that less is more, but that is more my personal preference as well. I feel like using a more simpler title that has more of a hook and stands out more can be very effective compared to creating a longer title which may be more difficult to remember, but it is completely up to you and what would best suit the story you're telling. In this as well, I want to mention that you can also use a character's name for the title, and there are plenty of anime and manga that do this. If your character has a unique name, something that really stands out, and your character is someone who really affects the story as a whole, then it might be a really good idea to have that character's name as the title of your story. And my third part to this video is telling a story through the title. In a way, your title also needs to tell a little bit of a story. Just from reading the title alone, you should be able to get a good idea of the kind of story and be able to understand a story just through those simple words alone. My advice for doing this is to let the title speak for itself. Consider how you can have a title that really gives a good idea of what the story is about just from reading it. The title itself should really speak for itself. You should be able to get a good idea of the kind of story just from reading it. I also really recommend that you try to include a secret in your title. This can be a bit difficult, but consider if you can include a double meaning in your title. It might mean one thing, but it also means something else. I think one of the best examples of this is in A Silent Voice, where it not only refers to Shoko, who is deaf, but it also refers to Shoya, where he feels like he doesn't know how to properly communicate his feelings. His words go silent when he tries to talk about those things with others. In a way, the title A Silent Voice is really about communicating as well, maybe not through words, but through that silence. I think one of my favourites for this is the title of Fruits Basket, which refers to how the characters in the story feel like they are the ones that don't fit in. They are the rice ball in the fruits basket. So there are many different ways you can give your title a double meaning, and it's important to think about your story and how you can create a title that really gives that feeling. You might let your audience in on a little secret through your title, or you might consider how to reveal secret information that can only be fully understood later on in your story. This can take practice, and I recommend getting a piece of paper and writing down many different ideas until you find one that really works for your book. It's not always easy to come up with a good title, and I don't think that the title should be something that you necessarily have to do at the very start of writing your book. You might write your book and get halfway or even closer to the end before coming up with a good title. It's really important that you have a good understanding of your book when you are coming up with the right title for it, so you can help to tell that story through the title as well. Now, before I end this video, I want to give some additional tips that can really help you in coming up with a good title for your story. I really recommend that you ensure that your title isn't already used in another popular book. This doesn't mean that you can't use your title if your title has already been used in another book in general, but if your title is used in a really popular book, then it might be really hard for yours to also stand out apart from that book. It can feel kind of disappointing if your title has also been used, but if you're calling your story Naruto, for example, and Naruto already exists, then it's going to be really hard for your story to stand apart, even if your story is entirely different. So make sure that when you are coming up with your title, that you find a title that is different from popular titles out there, something that can stand apart on its own. It's also important to consider if that title is something that is easily mentionable or shareable. Are people able to easily talk about that title, to remember it and pass it on to others? That's where your story can become way more memorable, and that's why it's really important to create a title that not only tells that story to you, but also helps to share that story with others. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what kind of titles you're creating for your stories, because I'd really love to hear about them. If you have any other ideas or suggestions on how you like to come up with titles for your stories, I would really love to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure others would as well. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!